So we're in the middle of the 12th principle of the Rambam, principle of Yemos HaMashiach, the Messianic era. And I mentioned last time that you have 13 principles. We usually think of them as principles of belief, though that we may discuss independently. But the only one in which you have a prescription of something other than believing is this one. And this one says that if the time before the Mashiach comes gets longer and longer and it's hard to bear, wait for him. Now that's a verse in Habakkuk. It's not the Rambam's recommendation. It's an explicit pasuk. And chakei there in Hebrew, sometimes translated as wait for, and one of the commentaries there says it means to hope for, tikva. And I raised the question, why would this principle alone have included in it more than just a fact to be dealt with, a fact to be assimilated, a fact to be committed to, but in this case, a particular attitude? Now, some people try to explain this sort of philosophically, that in this case, if you didn't have the attitude, you wouldn't really have the belief. I can hear the thought, you see somebody calmly drinking a cup of tea, and he says, "How you doing?" He says, "Fine." "What's new?" "What's new?" He says, "In 3/4 of an hour, I'm going to be dead." Really? Hard to take you seriously, sir. If you really believe that, you wouldn't be sitting here drinking a tea like that. So sometimes, if you don't behave in a certain way, we won't trust you that you believe it. So they want to say, if you're not waiting and anticipating and hoping for it to happen, you don't really believe it. To understand what it means that the Mashiach comes, the times of the Mashiach, you'll be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any impediments, and be able to do mitzvahs and acquire Torah and understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the key to the world to come, you wouldn't be calm about it. I hear the thought as perhaps a true thought. The question is whether that's what's meant here in the 13 principles, because there are other principles here that it seems, if we were to take a person's belief seriously, he would have certain reactions to it, and they aren't mentioned. For example, if you believe in reward and punishment, that ought to have an effect on your actions, shouldn't it? And also your hopes and fears, shouldn't it? I think we would be suspicious of a person who said, "Of course I believe all 13, when it comes to the true false test, I always check off true." And you ask him, "Well, how do you feel about doing Avera?" "No, I do it if I feel like it. I don't do it if I don't feel like it." "Feel like it? What about punishment?" "Doesn't bother me." I think we would be suspicious that he doesn't really believe in the punishment. And yet, in that, one of the principles doesn't say, and you must fear the punishment and you must be hoping for the reward. So if it's just a philosophical reflection, certain types of beliefs should be expressed in certain types of psychological reactions. And if a person doesn't have the psychological reactions, we're going to be doubtful that he has the belief. If that's the significance of putting it into the 12th of the Mashiach, then it seems to me it should have been also in the one about reward and punishment. And especially the one about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Borei, is the only one it's appropriate to pray to. That's one of the principles, that it's appropriate to pray only to the Creator. Wouldn't you have thought that the author would say, and someone who doesn't pray to the Creator, or someone prays to somebody else, has trouble here? Because if he does, then we don't believe that he's committed to this principle. And he doesn't say that. The only place where the associated attitude is mentioned is here in the 12th principle. So I don't think that approach of testing the sincerity of his belief by his actions is going to be a good explanation for why in the 12th principle alone the associated attitude is mentioned. Second of all, as I mentioned a moment ago, this idea of waiting and hoping for the Mashiach is an explicit verse. So it isn't the Rambam's philosophical reflection on, well, this is a belief, and beliefs have to be expressed in feelings and actions, and so forth and so on. It's a verse of Habakkuk. So I think, though I haven't seen this discussed, I think the right approach is to say that having the attitude is part of the avoda of this principle. These principles are an avoda of a Jew, like the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like everything else that the Torah tells us to do is service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the other 12, the service is accepting them, committing ourselves to them, living in terms of them, and so forth and so on. Here, alone, there's a certain attitude that's part of the avoda of this principle. So then the question will be, why is that? Well, what is Habakkuk telling us about this principle that informs how we live, how we express ourselves, and how we relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I looked up a little bit the commentaries on Habakkuk, and I didn't see any answer to that question there. Not that I looked at all of them, and if you find something, please send it to me. I'll be very happy. But I think one thing that happens when you live in terms of hoping for and expecting the Mashiach, I think that has an effect on your life. When you live on a daily basis and you're engaged in activities and you're trying to accomplish things and so forth and so on, you're not living within that 24 hours alone. Let's say you're in medical school. You're a second-year student. I think you're banking a lot on getting the medical degree, aren't you? 2.5 years from now. And then after that, going through residency and becoming a professional doctor, aren't you? Isn't that why you're doing what you're doing now? You're doing it because you're looking forward to a certain continuation. If you read that this medical school that you're attending has lost its accreditation and can't give degrees, you're going to be very disappointed. You're going to look to transfer as quickly as possible. So the question is, when we live our daily lives and go about our various projects, we have our hopes and fears, we have our expectations, how do we feel about the life in which we're living? Now, there's a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, it calls this world, the world, that means the world also includes this period of history, as the prosdor. It's the hallway before the entrance to the Great Hall. Oh, listen, there are things to do in the hallway. Pay for the ticket and check your coat in the clothes closet and perhaps wash up, and there are things to do. You have a gift to give somebody, so make sure the wrapping is okay, But you're in the hallway, hello. You're not in the banqueting room. You're not at the event. You're preparing yourself for the event. So that ought to color what you're doing, color the sense of significance of what you're doing, and what your mindset is. First chapter of the Mesilas Yesharim says this at length, talks about the idea of it being a prosdor, just being a hallway. And he says, because Baruch Hu created this hallway for you to get to the ultimate end, which is the world to come. And therefore, your obligation to do everything in this world that will get you to the world to come. That means, as you walk through your day, world to come is before your eyes. That's something which you said in the morning, Shachar said the 13 principles, and you won't see it again until tomorrow morning. No, it's before your eyes the whole time. Because whatever you're in and whatever you're doing, you're measuring it against, will this get me to Olam Haba or won't it? Now, according to the Rambam, as we've seen, the times of the Messiah are the entrance way to get to Olam Haba. That's why he says every scholar and every prophet desired the Messianic era, because in the Messianic era it will be available and comfortable to do all of the things that you need to do to get to Olam Haba. The ultimate goal is to get to Olam Haba. So I think the one element of the service in waiting for the Messiah is to think differently about what you're doing now. I wonder how often when you set yourself to do something and you achieve it, how much of the thought is, wow, I did that well. Baruch Hashem. I understand. Because Baruch Hu is behind everything, and I have to acknowledge that. I did it well. Yeah, Baruch Hashem, I did it well. Self-congratulatory. Or maybe it was a competitive test, and you're coming out on top. Aha, I'm on top. Or there are people who are invested in you, and who you want to please, and you think, boy, they invested in me, and it's going to please them that I managed to do this. I've accomplished something. All of those reflections are within this scope of the world. They're within this period of the world. They're within this condition of the world. Maybe part of what hoping for the Mashiach and waiting for the Mashiach is supposed to do is to, let's be realistic and not too grandiose, at least expand our context and think, and this will get me there, or will help bring that to come. We'll get through this hallway into the antechamber so that we'll be able to go into the great chamber. Put that as part of the framework in which we see things. When I was first becoming interested in Yiddishkeit, a man who was the nephew of my Rebbe Zatzal, the man's name was Avram Horowitz Zatzal, he told me once, my goal in life is that my children should look like my parents. Well, I was rather simplistic at the time, and I thought his goal in life is that clothing styles shouldn't change. That's his goal in life. That doesn't sound right, actually. So I asked him, he said, no, I'm not talking about clothing styles. He said, I understand that there's a chain of generations. It starts with Abraham, and it goes to the Mashiach. I don't want to be a broken link. I want my children to look like my parents. I want to transmit to my children what I got from my parents. So I heard that. I thought to myself, this man lives in a chain of 4,000 years of history. When he's living a day, that day is part of a 4,000-year development of history. Wow. And that ends with the Mashiach. So for him, the Mashiach is that endpoint that he's thinking of getting to. He's measuring what he's doing now with the Mashiach in mind. So I think that's part of what's going on here. That you should add to your measuring rod of the things that you do, the way in which it will enable you to relate to the times of the Mashiach. Is your question hand up? Yeah.
Why would you not say that he wants his children to look like him? Why his parents? He's the next link in the chain. Not so to speak.
What does a link do?
Connect.
It connects two other things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's what a link does.
He's the link, yes.
You know, we have a very fundamental rule that the only genuine teaching is from someone who's receiving from something else, either from a teacher, or has received from a teacher, or receiving from a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Kodesh Baruch Hu makes you capable of giving. It works like this. The flow from the top is triggered by a connection to the bottom. The connection to the bottom comes first, and then comes the flow from the top. If there's no connection to the bottom, there'll be no flow from the top, because the flow is not interested in going part way down the ladder. The purpose of the flow is to get all the way to the bottom. So now, if you're trying to influence. You're trying to influence somebody that needs influence, someone with whom for whom you have resources that he doesn't have, so he's lower than you on the ladder. Well, there's got to be a flow from above. If you're making it up yourself, it's going to be fantasy. But that means you have to be connected above to receive in order to be able to transmit that flow to the ones who are below you. That's what you want to transmit. So it's a very, very fundamental idea in Jewish thinking across the board. Person who commits himself to teach others gets siyata d'shemaya. He gets the help of heaven in ways, in thinking about things, in analyzing things. He gets the help of heaven in ways that other people don't. Because Hakadosh Baruch Hu wants the flow to go down. Okay, so that I think is part of the... Oh yes, and I do want to point out, although the Rambam doesn't have the words here, as I told you, the 13 principles in the end of the Siddur, although we don't know the author, do match the Rambam's formulations here, although they're much, much shorter. And I want to just be medaic, one word there. It says, if the time becomes long before he comes, I will wait for him or hope for him. B'chol yom sheyavo. Every day that he will come. I want to point out, it says, I will wait for him every day that he will come. It does not say, I will wait for him that he will come every day. They're very different. The first way of putting it, I'll wait for him every day that he will come, every day tells me when I'm waiting. Every day. The second way, which it doesn't say, is I wait for him that he shall come every day. Every day then tells me when he's coming, not when I'm waiting. And it's just not true. We don't believe that the Mashiach can come every day. Our tradition tells us he's not going to come on Shabbos. He's not going to come on Erev Shabbos. That's 2/5 of the week. He's not going to come in those days. I should be waiting for him on Friday and waiting for him on Shabbos that he shall come. He shall come when he will come. But not that he will come today. So it's very important there that the every day goes on the when we wait, not on when he will come. I've heard people say things other than that, so I'm mentioning that. Now, when he says the Messianic era, he makes it clear that he says to anyone who isn't fully committed to this or is lightheaded about it, we spoke about that yesterday, fails this principle. And the commentators say one way to look at his failure is that he doesn't trust the prophets. So what's behind this principle is really trusting the prophets, which is a prior principle. And then this would be another example of where you could have deduced 12 from the prior principle that there are prophets and that what they tell you is true, but he wants you to have it prominent in and of itself. This is one of the consequences of that you have to accept the idea of the Mashiach. And the lightheadedness, which he also mentions here, which is again, nothing the principle say. If you're flippant about this principle, then you've lost it. Is because you have to take seriously what the prophets tell you about what that period of time will be like. And if that is something which is trivial to you, then you've got some serious either rational disability or spiritual disability. You imagine speaking to someone about the world and occurrences in the world, and the question of world peace comes up, and he says, "Could we talk about something else? I mean, that's boring. It's not really interesting, world peace." I think you'd be a little surprised. World Peace? Uninteresting? Just so dull and boring, you'd rather talk about baseball? I mean, what's the matter with you? World peace? So the same thing is true here. The time in which what we strive to do every day, there are so many hindrances, so many pitfalls in trying to do mitzvahs the way they should be done, and study Torah the way it should be studied, and so many distractions. And in the times of Mashiach, all of that will go away, and you just make jokes about it, and feel that it's trivial. There's something wrong with you. So that's being stressed here because the attitude towards it has to be stressed as one of real seriousness. That's okay. That's what I have to say about coming Mashiach. And then comes the 13th, where he just says it's the resurrection of the dead. And we've explained it elsewhere. Now, real explanation for it is in the Ma'amar al Tchias HaMesim, which is an essay that he wrote towards the end of his life. First of all, he wrote that essay because a Rosh Yeshiva in Baghdad accused him of denying the resurrection. That's a pretty serious accusation. And he did it on the basis of what he writes in the Mishnah Torah, in Hilchos Tshuva, where he talks about the world to come, which for him is a disembodied existence. Only the soul goes there. And in that discussion, chapters 8, 9, and 10 of the laws of Tshuva, he doesn't mention resurrection at all. So, and he speaks of that as the great reward. We saw that in this essay also, in the Hakdama to Perek Helek, in the commentary in the Mishnah. That the great reward is existing in the world to come. The great punishment is not existing in the world to come. Here, as you see, the resurrection of the dead gets a one-liner. Actually, in the laws of repentance, in the laws of tshuva, it's also a one-liner. Because in there, he talks about 24 categories of people who lose their share of the world to come. And one of them is someone who denies the resurrection. So it is in the Mishnah Torah. If you read every line, pay attention, it's there. How could you claim that he denies it if it's written there? How could you claim that he denies it if it's one of his 13 principles by which you identify as a Jew, as we will see, right here in the commentary in the Mishnah? How could you say that he denies it? So in his introduction to that essay, the Rambam says, I wrote about this, and I wrote about it explicitly. And when I wrote it in the Mishnah Torah, I said there are 24 categories. Now, you could have counted them up on your own. I could have just given you the list, right? Why did I write 24 categories? Because if one of them goes missing, you'll know one's missing. And in particular, if the resurrection were blotted out or forgotten, or some copyist forgot to put it in, you'd know something's missing and go find it. That's why I put it there. But what can I complain, says the Rambam? How can I complain that people misunderstood me and thought I denied the resurrection? Think of what happened to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Creator. Creator told us there is one and only one Creator, one and only one God. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And he says, along came the Christians, and they said, oh, this is the Shema. This is what it means. Shema Yisrael. Listen and know, Israel. Hashem, Elokeinu, Hashem. 1, 2, 3. Count them. There they are. 3. Echad is 1. 3 is 1. 1 is 3. And that's Christianity. So Rambam says, if the Creator can write monotheism, word for word, and get interpreted as 3 in 1, I can't complain that people thought that I denied the resurrection. So the Kal V'chomer. Rambam had a sense of humor. He had a sense of irony. And that's what he says about it. Now, one of the things he says in that Ma'amar is extremely important because the Rambam has a completely undeserved reputation as believing in nature and denying miracles. That he denying miracles is like so insane. And I'm just now finishing a new book in which I go through that in one of the chapters, where I review all the places where he writes about nature, and he explicitly says that miracles are possible in spite of the nature and all the rest of it. But in that essay, he says, he makes a point of describing this particular miracle of resurrection as overwhelmingly spectacular. Much more spectacular than splitting the sea. Much more spectacular than manna coming from heaven and a portable well that followed through the wilderness, and the rocks coming out and down from heaven on the soldiers of the city of Ai and conquering the land of Israel. Much more spectacular. Bodies disintegrate. Even the bodies of great tzaddikim disintegrate. Because the Tanoim used to put the bodies in the ground for a year, and after all the flesh had disintegrated, dig them up and put the skeletons in a different burial place. I know sometimes for tzaddikim it doesn't happen, and so on and so on. There are all sorts of traditions. Just saying that, tikvas Hashem Rima, tikvas Adam Rima, the hope of man is the worm, is not a or maggot is not a joke. So then, where's it going to come from? This body, all of the atoms of the body, which are now scattered, are going to be gathered in one by one. Each one has a little label. Reuven Schwartz, Reuven Schwartz, Reuven Schwartz. Right? So pick them all up and bring it back together. That's, almost inconceivable. Or some other way that something that's not alive will become alive, and then will be reunited with the soul. If you had any thoughts about the laws of nature, or I would sometimes, it's better not to talk of laws of nature, but to talk of the regularities of nature, because regularities is not committal as to why they're regular, what makes them regular. This is by far the most spectacular violation of the regularities of nature, Tchias HaMesim, resurrection. And the Rambam there has a whole essay saying, of course he believes it. So that there should be any question of the Rambam's attitude towards miracles on the grounds of his commitment to nature is just grossly negligent. His commitment to the regularities of nature, again, I'm saying that because I'm avoiding taking any commitment as to what makes them regular. Could very well be that Kodesh Baruch Hu makes things happen, like Rav Dessa says, like the Chazon Ish says, like many others say. He says explicitly is based on various verses in the Tanakh and various statements of Chazal. He never cites Aristotle. He never cites any philosophical idea that has to be so. Never. That has nothing to do with his commitment. So he understands them, and he understands that the same sources, of course, talk about Nisim and call them Nisim in the flows. So in his mind, and in any sane person's mind, there's no contradiction between those things whatsoever. And the resurrection is like the greatest of all of them. The question is, what's the purpose of the resurrection? Remember, the Rambam's picture of how the world, how life works, is that you come into this world. Coming into this world means you have a soul and a body, nefesh and a guf. Rambam's word for soul is nefesh. And you have challenges, you have commandments, mitzvos, you have Torah, learning Torah. Learning Torah involves understanding the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And then on the basis of the success of all those activities, all of them, not just learning the philosophy of theology. Look at the 9th chapter of the Laws of Tshuva, where he says this at least 5 times. On the basis of your success of all of them, you go into Olam Haba, which means the soul goes to the world to come. For the Rambam, the body is not there, and that's the end of the story. So what exactly would be the purpose of returning the body to the soul, the soul to the body? After all, the Rambam, after Tchiyas HaMesim, they have to die again, because they don't go into the world to come with a body. And also, Adam, according to the Rambam, was created to die. His death was built into his creation. And when it says, when you eat from the tree, then you'll die, from the Rambam, that's not a transition from immortality to mortality. It's a shortening of the life that he otherwise would have had. And as I mentioned, I don't remember where it is exactly. It's one of the the slichos, where it's talking about Adam Rishon, and the slicha says, Kotzar Yomav, because of the transgression of the tree of knowledge, Kadosh Baruch Hu shortened his days. I think that's an expression of the Rambam's point of view. When you go from infinity to 17 years, that's not called shortening his days. That's changing his essence from immortal to mortal. Shortening days means it was going to be longer, and now it's going to be shorter. At any rate, so then the question is, what's the purpose of Tchiyas HaMesim? So I haven't seen this discussed, but consistently with the other things that the Rambam says, I would suggest the following. The Rambam says that you get into Olam Haba through your mitzvos and your good character, and because if you have failures of character, you don't get in. Someone who builds up his own reputation by riding on another Jew's embarrassment and degradation does not go to Olam Haba, the Rambam says. So you go, what the ticket of entry is mitzvos and good character and knowledge of Torah and knowledge of Kodesh Baruch Hu. But the medium of connection in the world to come with the Kodesh Baruch Hu is your knowledge of Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's true. So the knowledge plays a central role, but it isn't the only thing. As I said the other day, to think that Rambam is a philosopher and all he cares about is philosophy is just dead wrong. I have this in this book that I'm writing, and I'm finishing now also. So now, what happens if a person is born into a condition where it's impossible for him to accomplish these things? Let's say it's wartime or famine, and let's say there are pogroms and expulsions, and let's say he has elderly parents that he has to care for, and let's say that he can just barely, with all of his effort, acquire enough food to eat. So when he comes to the end of his life, he will not have the knowledge of Torah. He will not have knowledge of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. His record of mitzvahs may be okay because there's nothing else he could do. If he did everything he could do, then his record of mitzvahs could be perfect. But the medium of connection won't be there. So is he going to be lost? So maybe that's what Tchiyas HaMesim is for. In part, I would never say that. I have a single answer for the whole institution. That this person who, through no fault of his own, wasn't able to acquire that knowledge, will be given a chance to acquire it under much more favorable circumstances. And then he'll die. And then his soul will go into Olam Haba. So it's a way to pick it up for those people. Now, I haven't really stressed this, but let me put it in just as context. How long does this go on? The Messianic era. Rambam's view is it goes on forever. There is no end to this phase of history. It's not all wrapped up, repacked in the suitcase and go on to something else. The world doesn't have an end. You'll ask me about the 6,000th year. Rambam doesn't believe in it. He mentions it explicitly, and he says, first of all, those people who talk about it don't understand it, because that statement says, Olam Hazeh, our type of history, is 6,000 years, and then there's a 7th 1,000 in which the world is charev, is under destruction. And the Rambam says, what keeps time is regular physical motion. So if you think that the physical world is wrapped up during that time, you can't be right, because the statement says it's 1,000 years long. So something's misunderstood there. And the Rambam says, and even if it were understood correctly, I believe that this is the opinion of one sage, and it's outweighed by the opinions of other sages who say it's not true. So the Rambam doesn't believe in that. And he has a great deal in the Gemara and the Vuchim where he says the prophets, the descriptions of the prophets, of the world coming apart and the heavens, the mountains melting and the fishes opening up and the heavens falling and all the rest of that, it's all poetry. It's all poetry, political upheaval, social upheaval, religious upheaval, economic upheaval. None of it is to be taken literally. And he has a very interesting support for it, that one of the verses that gives such a description of the world coming to an end, so to speak, is found in the prophet Yoel, talking about prophet Yoel's past. Talking about something that actually happened. And I think if you look at history books, you will not find that 2,700 years ago, the world came to an end. That didn't happen. So he says, obviously this is poetical for military and political and social and economic upheavals, and it's not talking about. So the Rambam, the world goes on forever. And when you think about it, logically, it's not obvious why it should stop. Why should it stop? More people, more mitzvos, more understanding, more souls going into that ideal afterlife condition. Why shouldn't that go on forever? Why should you call it a halt? At what number would you say more is superfluous, more is unnecessary? Indeed, the Ramchal, in the Derech Hashem, when he talks about this, he uses a phrase which he uses often, Gazra Chachmaso. God's wisdom decreed that the period of testing and effort and accomplishment should be finite, and the period of reward should be infinite. Well, Gazra Chachmaso is short for saying there's some divine wisdom here, and I either don't know it or I'm not telling you. He doesn't explain, he just says Gazra Chachmaso. I don't think it's obvious to him either why because Baruch Hu should call a halt to it. Why should it be called a halt? How is coming from a point of view of Kabbalah. And the Kabbalah, so far as we know, the Rambam didn't have. So he has extra resources. He, of course, accepts the 6,000 years, and the 6,000 years are like the 6 days of creation, and there are certain midos with which the world is created, and so forth and so on. So you get an idea of closure built into the underpinning spiritual system that this world expresses. But if you didn't have that underpinning, just philosophically, there's no reason whatsoever why you shouldn't adopt the Rambam's point of view. So this is the principle of Tchias HaMesim, is what I'm going to say about it. We're all together? Okay, now the Rambam closes. I'm not going to be able to finish this today, but he closes with a statement which is extremely important and very widely discussed. One point about it that I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to mention again today, but I'm going to continue with tomorrow. When a person has these 13 principles in his hand, again, this is a translation from Arabic, obviously, and some would say belief or trust or commitment is fixed, then he enters into the group called Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people. Possessing these 13 principles gives him entry into the Jewish people. And we therefore have an obligation to love him and to have mercy on him. And everything which HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us concerning love and brotherhood one to another, all those apply to a person who has these principles in hand. And even if he will do everything of the transgressions due to desire and the overwhelming force, not overwhelming is too strong, the powerful force of his poor nature, meaning being embodied and all the rest. So even if he does a vast list of transgressions based on that kind of failure, he'll be punished according to the greatness of his transgression, and he has a share in the world to come. And he's called one of Posh'ei Yisrael. Posh'ei means wicked criminals, the wicked criminals of Israel. But he's called of Yisrael. Now, if I stop here, the natural thought is, so if he has these principles, no matter what else he does, he's a member of the Jewish people, and we are required to love him and to treat him as a brother, and if he does terrible things, he'll be punished for it, but he's a member of the Jewish people. So the natural thought is, and if he doesn't have one? What then? If he doesn't have one. Golly, sounds like he's out of luck, he's just not there. And from this reflection, plus a false piece of history, the idea has been expressed that a person who doesn't have one of these commitments isn't part of the Jewish people. And it's put in Yiddish, Nebach an apikoris is noch an apikoris. A person who is a non-believer through no fault of his own, through circumstances totally beyond his control, too bad, because he doesn't have one of these principles. So he's just out anyway. Never, but still, he's not apikoris. Okay, that's the thought that would occur to you. And in logic, it's not a bad thing to occur to you, but now let's be careful about the following words that he says. And you'll see that conclusion is wrong. And then I'll tell you about the history. If one of these principles becomes weak for a person, nisro faith became weak. It can only become weak if before that it was strong, right? So we're describing here a deterioration, not just an absence. Nisro faith, lo adam yisod me'ela hayisodos. Then, hare yotza min haklal. He left the group. Oh, he left the group. You can only leave the group if you were in it, right? If you were never there, you can't say that you left the group. And he denied the basic principle of Judaism. And he's called a min, apikoros, kotis benetios, various phrases in the literature which describe people who have wrong beliefs. And we are obligated to hate him and to kill him. And on him, the verse says in Psalms, and this is the linchpin, Halo misanecha Hashem esna. Behold Hashem, those who hate you, I shall hate. Wow. This guy's in really bad trouble, right? Now let me ask you, does this describe a third generation American Jew in Cincinnati whose mother and grandmother and great-grandmother, his fourth generation, were all Jewish, and he had no Jewish upbringing whatsoever, had no clue what the Torah is about? Do these words describe such a person? I don't think so. Nothing became weak in him. He didn't exit any group he was part of. You can't call him someone who hates Hashem. That would be idiotic. He hates Hashem? Doesn't know anything about it. Rabbi Meisel, who taught me all of this, pointed out that in the Mishnah Torah, these people, the Rambam says, are guilty because of their rishus, their rashoim, they're wicked. Is this fourth generation American in Cincinnati wicked? Certainly not. We're talking about a person who comes to deny what he formerly believed. In Hilchos Mamrim, Perek Beis, if I remember correctly, the laws of rebels, he talks there about the two rebellious sects in the ancient world, and the Karoim, the Karaites, close to his time. And he says, those people who consciously and rebelliously turned their backs on Torah qualify as these types of rebels. But their children and their grandchildren, who were raised according to their false beliefs, we must have mercy on them. We must draw them close to us with avosos ahava, cords of love, until they return to their Father that's in heaven. These people don't have these principles, so they're missing some of the principles. Remember, the principle of Torah and Hashemayim includes the oral tradition according to the Rambam. So the Karaites denied the oral tradition, they don't have that principle. Not supposed to kill them. Absolutely not. Not to hate them. No. Avosos ava. Now, this phraseology that I mentioned to you, Nebechap Anikoros is Noichan Apikoros, Rabbi Meiselman told me, he traced it. Rabbi Chanan says that he heard from someone that he heard from Chaim Brisker these words. That's all. We don't know who the in between was, and we don't know whether it really happened. And even Rabbi Chanan doesn't commit himself to saying that it's true. He reports the incident. That's all. That's what he heard. But given what we know about the Rambam, they cannot possibly be true. So, of course, onus applies here like it applies everywhere else in Torah. There's such a thing as a thing being beyond your control, beyond your capability to have managed, and then you do not lose anything because of the consequences of something that's onus. Yeah. Right.
I wanted to ask about the concept about the person in Klal Israel that somehow failed to some extent in the challenges of Taiva. I think it's I would ask two things, because it's a very heavy concept in the sense that it's very good because it doesn't remove that people from the people of Israel, but also, I mean, at least from what we live nowadays, like there's like a humongous taivas all around the world, and maybe so the question will be if tshuva is an ingredient that could somehow fix that taiva failures.
Okay, first of all, I applaud your choice of words. Your choice of words. It's like you said, he failed the challenge of taiva. That's very good. You don't say taiva overwhelmed him, because then you're implying he doesn't have free will. You don't want to be committed on that. He failed the taiva. Now, we spoke about this before. In Perek Gimel of Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam says that you don't weigh up the righteousness or the evil of a person on the basis of the number of his mitzvos and the number of his transgressions. You weigh it up on the basis of their size. And he says there are certain mitzvos that outweigh many transgressions, and there are certain transgressions that outweigh many mitzvos. And he says that a human being cannot do this. The only way in which that this calculation can be made is by kel deos, meaning a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Only a Kodesh Baruch Hu can weigh up what it is that makes the particular action a big action or a smaller action. Kel deos is a quotation from Chana's Nevuah, where she talks about Kodesh Baruch Hu knowing what Penina really meant when she was attacking her. And deos in the Rambam's language is character traits. Hilchos deos is perfecting your character. So what he means is, you have an action, and the action has like two legs. One is what happened, and the other is what's the status of the agent who made it happen. So for example, if the agent made it happen in total ignorance, then you don't attach the evil on the action to him, because he didn't know what he was doing. You might attach negligence to him if he should have known, and if he had no obligation to know, you don't even attach that. So you don't read your judgment of the agent from the status of the action. There's a big gap there that has to be filled in knowledge and intention and everything else. And the more difficult the decision is, the more difficult it is to do right, the less liable you are to punishment for doing wrong. And this sliding scale, with many sources in the Gemara, the Rishonim, where there's a sliding scale. So as you said, you're absolutely right. We are surrounded by a whole environment and culture of taiva, of blind animalistic desire and blind emotional desire, like those who live their whole lives to feel good by condemning and destroying enemies. That's their life, free something or other. Since we live in such a culture, failures of this kind will be much less serious than they otherwise would be. You presented it as if we're confronted by this gigantic obstacle and destructive barrier, and therefore we're going to be very, very guilty. On the contrary, the barrier is so gigantic and so destructive that we'll be less guilty because we're surrounded by it, and it's very, very difficult to resist. So I don't think you should worry so much about our lives being spectacular failures for that reason. On the contrary, there's a certain comfort in that, yeah, I'm going to have to go, yeah.
So because the degree of the test of our generation is so great, then even what would be maybe a lesser act in another generation is more so in this generation.
100%, absolutely, 100%. We used to have in the office here a quotation from the Chafetz Chaim. So you say, how could we imagine that the Mashiach will come to our generation when we're so weak and we're so unaccomplished? So one of the answers that helps is what I just told you. But there it says the schus, the merit that's necessary for the coming of the Mashiach, is like a bank account. You make deposits, and when it gets to a certain level, then the Mashiach will come. The last generation may make a very, very small contribution. It just gets you up to the top. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be that you're qualitatively better than previous generations. You just finished the job. Okay.